I opened the acceptance email in my bedroom. My hands were shaking. Harvard. Full acceptance. My dream. But before I could even scream, I heard my dad's voice downstairs. Calm, too calm, saying something about covering the rehab bill. My stomach dropped. Rehab? I ran downstairs, laptop still open in my hand. Dad, what rehab? For who? He froze. Mom looked away. My brother, Tyler, sat on the couch, trembling, a band on his wrist. The kind you get at those facilities. Then it hit me. The education fund. The account my grandparents started when I was born. The one they said was safe, untouchable. I asked quietly, "Where's my college fund?" Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sweetheart, your brother needed help. We couldn't just let him fall again." Again. Fourth time, Mom whispered, eyes wet. My hands went numb. "Dad, how much was in there?" "About 57,000, he said softly. "He's family. You'll understand one day." I couldn't even cry. I just nodded, like some stranger in my own house. That night, I lay in the dark, listening to the faint sound of Tyler laughing in the next room, gaming with his friends. Rehab was over. He was fine. And my future? Gone. My name is Emily Carter. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever realized your dreams were traded away like spare change? Because that night I learned, sometimes the people who claim to love you will sell your wings to save someone who never plans to fly. The next morning, the acceptance letter sat on the kitchen counter, unopened now, like it didn't even belong to me. Mom was making pancakes for Tyler. Dad was humming to himself. The house smelled like butter and betrayal. I sat across from them and said, "So, what's the plan? How am I supposed to pay for college now?" Dad didn't look up. "We'll figure something out. Community college, maybe. Scholarships." He said it like we were talking about a grocery list. Tyler smirked, flipping a pancake onto his plate. "Don't be so dramatic, Em. It's just money. Just money." That $57,000 wasn't just money. It was every babysitting gig, every honor roll award, every birthday check from grandma I'd tucked away because Dad said, "It's for your future." Now my future was sitting in front of me, eating pancakes he didn't deserve. I left the table before I said something I'd regret. But regret was already crawling under my skin. That day I went to my job at the diner. My boss, Linda, noticed my red eyes. "Rough morning?" she asked. I just nodded. When the lunch rush hit, I served tables like a machine, smiling on autopilot while my mind replayed Dad's words. "You'll understand one day." After my shift, I checked my bank app again. Zero. Even the account was closed. Dad had drained it completely. That night, I wrote an email to Harvard's financial aid office, asking for any emergency options. The response came fast. "Unfortunately, your aid package is already finalized. Without the education fund, your spot cannot be secured." I read it 3 times. The words blurred. I wanted to scream. But instead, I just stared at the screen until my reflection disappeared in the black. Tyler came in later, half drunk, half smiling. "Hey, Em. You mad at me?" I looked up at him, the golden boy, the addict, the reason my dream died, and said, "No, Tyler. I'm not mad." Because I wasn't going to waste anger. I was saving it. For later. That night as I lay awake, I whispered to myself, "He took my fund. I'll take back everything." And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. I started smiling around them. That's how they knew nothing. It's funny, when you act okay, people stop looking too closely. Dad thought I'd moved on. Mom said, "We're so proud of how mature you're being, honey." Tyler? He was back to late nights, loud music, and empty promises. But behind every "it's fine, Dad," and every "love you, Mom," I was building something, piece by piece. My plan. I picked up extra shifts at the diner, started saving tips in cash, hidden in an old cereal box behind my bed. But that wasn't enough. So I got smarter. One night, after Dad fell asleep on the couch, I noticed his laptop open. The same one he used to manage his accounts. My heart pounded so hard I thought it'd wake him. I didn't steal anything. Not yet. But I looked. There was a transfer. $57,000 straight to a facility in Arizona. Rehab center. And then a week later, another transfer. $2,000 more. Personal expenses. Tyler's expenses. That was when I realized something. My brother wasn't just being helped. He was being funded. A week later, Tyler came home with a new phone. An iPhone 15 Pro. Paid in full. I asked, pretending to be curious. New phone? He grinned. Yeah. Dad said I needed a fresh start. A fresh start. With my money. That night, I sat outside under the porch light watching moths throw themselves into the bulb. I thought about how people destroy themselves chasing light that was never meant for them. So I made a decision. If they were going to burn me for him, then I'd make sure they saw what fire really looked like. Step 1. I found the rehab center's name from Dad's email. Step 2. I called them pretending to be my dad's assistant. Step 3. I got everything. Payment receipts, email threads, invoices. And there, in one of the documents, I found something that changed everything. A note attached to a transaction. Full payment received. Refund policy applicable if patient leaves early. Refund policy. Tyler didn't even complete the program, which meant somewhere out there was my money waiting. And that's when I smiled for real. The kind of smile that scares people once they finally understand what it means. The next morning I waited until the house was quiet. Dad had gone to work, Mom was out running errands, and Tyler was still sleeping off another late night. I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, heart racing. The rehab center's number was right there in the email thread I'd found. I dialed. A calm, professional voice answered. Sunrise Recovery Center, this is Dana speaking. How can I help you? I took a breath. Hi, this is Emily Carter. My father, David Carter, paid for my brother Tyler Carter's treatment there last month. He left early and I'm just following up about the refund process. There was a pause. Then Dana said, yes. The Carters. Let me pull that up. The click of her keyboard sounded like thunder. After a few seconds she said, yes, your father paid in full for a 12-week program. But your brother only stayed for 3. A partial refund of $28,500 was processed back to the payer's account 2 weeks ago. I froze. Wait, back to his account? Yes, ma'am. Refunded directly to the original payment source. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there. So Dad got half the money back. And he never said a word. Not to me. Not to Mom. Not to anyone. That night I checked his laptop again. The refund was there, deposited neatly into his personal checking account. Not the family one. Just his. He didn't just betray me once. He did it twice. The man who preached family first had pocketed the refund like it was a reward for his good parenting. I stared at the numbers on the screen. $28,500. Enough to cover a full year of Harvard tuition, if I could just get it back. And I knew I could. Because I wasn't the same girl who cried over an empty account anymore. I was the girl who'd learned to move quietly. So I started learning. I watched videos about online banking, transfers, account routing, digital tracing. Not to steal but to reclaim. Over the next week I noticed something. Dad kept his banking password written on a sticky note, taped inside his planner. He was predictable, arrogant in his trust of the people he hurt. One night, after everyone went to bed, I used it. Logged in. Watched his balance blink to life. $42,710. Including my $28,500 refund. I stared at that number, hands trembling. I could have transferred it right then. But that would have been too easy. Too quiet. No, I wanted him to know. I wanted him to feel what I felt. The shock, the silence, the betrayal. So I waited. Planned. And smiled like the perfect daughter while setting up every piece of his downfall. Because the money wasn't the point anymore. It was about balance. And I was done being the one who lost. Dad loved family dinners. Every Sunday, no matter how busy or broken we all were, he'd sit at the head of the table, pour himself a glass of red wine and pretend everything was fine. It was the perfect stage. That Sunday I wore my nicest dress. The one Mom bought for graduation photos I never got to take. Tyler stumbled in late, smelling like cheap beer and mint gum. Mom smiled tight, pretending not to notice. Emily, Dad said, slicing into his steak. You've been quiet lately. Still thinking about college? I looked up at him and smiled sweetly. Actually, yeah. I got some news. He leaned back, half interested. Oh. I heard from Harvard's financial office again, I said softly. They said my payment bounced. But that's weird, right? Since we had that fund. His fork froze midair. Mom blinked. Sweetheart. No, it's fine, Mom. I cut her off gently. I'm just confused because when I called the rehab center, they told me there was a refund. The table went silent. Even Tyler looked up. Dad's eyes snapped to me. You called them? I nodded. Yeah. They said you got back $28,500. The knife clattered against his plate. Emily, you had no right. No right, said still calm. To know where my own education money went? Mom whispered, David, is that true? He tried to speak, but Tyler suddenly laughed. A low, slurred laugh. Guess you didn't tell her, huh, Dad? Shut up, Tyler. Why? She already knows you used her fund for me. Might as well tell her you kept the refund too. The room cracked open. Mom's face drained of color. I watched them unravel. The lies, the guilt, the panic, like a slow-motion car crash. Then I said quietly, it's okay. I already took care of it. Dad's head snapped toward me. What do you mean? I reached into my bag, pulled out a folded printout. A screenshot from his account. The balance, $14,210. You might want to check your bank app, I said. He grabbed his phone, hands shaking. The color drained from his face as he read it. What did you do? I just took back what was mine, I said softly. $28,500 to be exact. Tyler's mouth fell open. Mom whispered my name. I smiled. Small, steady, unshaken. Relax, Dad. I didn't steal it. I transferred it back to the education fund account. In my name only this time. He looked at me like I just flipped the world upside down. Maybe I had. Because for once I was holding the power. I'm not your backup plan anymore, I said, standing. I'm not your sacrifice. I'm your reminder that I'm done being quiet. Then I left them sitting in that silence, the kind that tastes like shame and burns like truth. That night I checked the account again. The money was safe. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because justice wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about making them feel what they'd done. And I was just getting started. I wanted them to feel the shape of what they'd done, not just know it. Revenge is a performance. And forgiveness, when weaponized, is the deadliest act of theater. I called a family meeting. I said nothing about lawyers or transfers or printouts. I dressed like the girl who forgives easily. Soft sweater, hair pulled back, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Mom hovered by the doorway, terrified and hopeful at once. Tyler shuffled in, suspicious. Dad took his usual seat at the head of the table, chest puffed with false bravado. I want to help Tyler, I began, voice steady. But not like before. Not with handouts. With conditions. They blinked. Relief and curiosity warred on their faces like a bad stage light. I let them hope. First, I said, Tyler needs a sober plan. He needs accountability. I slid a small stack of papers across the table. Enrollment forms for an intensive outpatient program, a therapist's intake questionnaire, a list of sponsors. Second, I continued, I will fund his program, but only if Dad signs an admission. That he used my education money, that he pocketed the refund, and that he lied to Mom. I watched the air leave Mom's lungs instead of Tyler's. We'll sign anything, Dad said too quickly. His voice trembled under the bravado. I heard the man who'd pocketed my future crumble under his own smallness. Tyler laughed, a hollow sound, until he saw the therapist's number and went still. He hated rules more than he hated consequences. Third, I added, I will keep the payments transparent. Every dollar goes to treatment, never to you, Dad. I might have said it gently, but the words were a blade. He swallowed hard, eyes darting like a man plotting escape. He refused at first. He argued, stammered, tried to charm me with the same speeches he'd used for years. Family helps family, he said, the phrase as tired as his suit. I let him talk until his mouth ran dry. Then I did something they didn't expect. I hugged him. Not because I forgave him, I didn't. I hugged him because I wanted him to remember how I had loved him, so the betrayal would sit next to that memory and fester. He held on to me for a second that felt like an accusation. Mom cried quietly into her hands. Tyler watched us like a man watching a slow-motion train wreck. I signed the forms. I wrote the checks. I called the outpatient clinic and arranged weekly sessions. I set up a shared Google Drive, payment receipts, appointment confirmations, therapist's notes, and I invited Dad and Mom to view it. Transparency, I told them, would be the only currency accepted at our table now. They accepted the terms because they had no choice. Pride is expensive and guilt is cheaper. But acceptance wasn't reconciliation. It was leverage. For weeks, I sat in waiting rooms and watched Tyler argue with men who'd seen the same pattern. I watched Dad attempt to be a father he had never been and fail spectacularly. I watched Mom try to stitch pieces back together with the same hands that had once hidden receipts and excuses. At night, when they were asleep, I'd pull up the photo on my phone, the acceptance email that had once been my altar, and set it against the bank statement showing the refund and the transfer I'd made. 2 images stacked like evidence. I found satisfaction in the balance of numbers and the imbalance of their guilt. But the real victory wasn't in the money or the forms. It was in the way they began to look at me differently, not as the child they could dismiss, but as the person who could not be erased. Dad's apologies came slowly, awkward and sincere. Tyler's apologies came later, louder, resembling a young man learning the weight of his own ruin. I hadn't wanted their repentance to be easy. I wanted it to hurt them the way their choices had hurt me. So I stayed gentle and cold, an angel with a ledger. The twist, the part that tasted like both mercy and iron, came one rain-soaked night when Dad found the old cereal box behind my bed. Inside, lined in careful stacks, were every cent I'd saved from tips and babysitting, my true nest egg. He saw the way I'd rebuilt, not begged. He saw the math of my quiet fury, how I'd turned crumbs into currency and shame into strength. He looked up at me, small and stripped, and finally understood that. 2 months passed. Tyler stayed sober, mostly. Dad started coming home early, the smell of whiskey fading into something closer to guilt. Mom smiled again, but it was the kind of smile that trembles at the edges. We were functioning. A fragile kind of peace. And yet I couldn't rest. Because the balance sheet in my heart still didn't add up. They'd taken something from me, not just money but time, trust, certainty. And every time Dad said, "We're proud of you, Em," it sounded like he was trying to buy back grace on credit. Then one night, while cleaning out the old office, I found it. A stack of unopened mail shoved in a drawer under tax papers and old bills. On top was an envelope from Harvard. Dated 5 months ago. My chest went cold. I tore it open. Inside was a letter. My scholarship offer. They'd awarded me a partial scholarship, $35,000, contingent on confirming my enrollment by May 30th. The letter had arrived in April. Dad had hidden it. He never even told me. The deadline had passed. My seat, was gone. I stared at the date until the ink blurred. Then I sat down at Dad's desk, turned on his old lamp, and wrote a letter I never meant to send. Dear Dad, you didn't just take my money. You took my choices. You turned my dreams into bills and excuses, and you did it with a smile. You always said, family helps family. But all I've ever seen you do is save one son by breaking another child. You told me to understand. So here's what I understand now. You didn't want to help Tyler. You wanted to fix the version of him that looked most like you. You thought I'd forgive you because I was quiet. You mistook silence for weakness. But weakness doesn't rebuild. Weakness doesn't research refund policies or open old accounts, or save tip money in cereal boxes. Weakness doesn't stand up at family dinners and take back what's hers. I'm not weak. And you are not forgiven, not yet. Because forgiveness is earned. And you still owe me something no money can repay. The truth. I left the letter on his desk and walked out before I could change my mind. The next morning it was gone. At breakfast, Dad's eyes were red. He didn't say a word, just passed me a small folded paper. It was a printout of a new wire transfer, $35,000, sent to my education account. From savings, he muttered. It's not Harvard, but it's yours. For a second, I didn't know if I wanted to cry or scream, because that wasn't what I wanted. Not the money, not the gesture. What I wanted was the truth, the one that still lived between us, thick and heavy and waiting. So I looked him in the eye and said, "This isn't about fixing it, Dad. It's about owning it." He nodded, voice cracking. "Then help me own it." That was the first honest thing he'd said in a year. Maybe that was enough. Maybe. But as I walked out that morning, the fall air sharp against my skin, I realized something. Revenge had gotten me justice. But truth, that might just save what was left of us. And for the first time I didn't feel like his victim. I felt like his consequence. A year later I stood on a different campus. Not Harvard but Columbia. Not the dream I'd planned but the one I earned on my own terms. My tuition was paid through a mix of scholarships, savings, and yes, the money Dad eventually returned. But this time it wasn't about money. It was about control. Every decision, every form, every email, it all had my name on it. No one could take it away again. I rented a small apartment near campus. Cracked walls, second-hand furniture, and a window that overlooked the city. It was perfect, because it was mine. Sometimes on quiet nights I'd still get calls from home. Mom would update me on Tyler. He was working part-time, still sober. Dad had joined a family recovery program, not for addiction but for accountability. He sent me a letter once. No money this time. Just words. "Dear Emily, I read your letter every week. I keep it in my wallet. I wish I could say I don't recognize the man who did those things, but I do. I was him. I thought I was saving my son. I didn't realize I was breaking my daughter. You didn't just take back your money, you took back your power. You made me face myself. I'm proud of you not because you forgave me but because you made me earn your forgiveness. I hope someday you'll come home and see that we've all changed. Dad." I read it once and placed it in the same box that used to hold my cash tips. The cereal box. Because now it didn't hold money. It held proof. Proof that I survived them. Proof that I grew past the cage they built. On graduation day as I walked across the stage the crowd blurred. But I saw them, Mom, Tyler, and Dad, sitting together in the back row. No applause, no drama, no tears. Just quiet pride. And that was enough. After the ceremony, Dad waited for me outside. He didn't say, "I'm sorry again." He just said, "You did it." And I said, "No, Dad. We didn't." "I did." Then I smiled, not out of anger but peace. Because poetic justice isn't loud. It doesn't demand revenge or ruin. It's watching the people who broke you learn to live with the cracks they made, while you walk past them whole. That night I stood by my window, the city lights flickering like scattered stars. I thought about the girl who once cried over a drained account. And I whispered to her, "You got it back. Every cent. Every dream. Every piece of yourself." Then I closed the curtain and turned off the light.